You're watching Morning at NTV.
Happy New Week. Good morning. Welcome to Morning at NTV. My name is Malaki Villa-Odera. Now, being a Monday, we thought let's go ahead on Kickstarter. And so we'll be talking about what we saw last week. And China is making good its promise to give, Africa some financial aid. And so last week we saw the government of Uganda signing an agreement with China for 800 billion Uganda shillings for rural electrification. But what does this mean? Every single ever so frequently we're seeing the government getting into this particular, agreements with China, getting money for them. What does this mean for the country? And if we don't watch this space, what are we likely to lose out on as a country? And so to break that down is Dr. Fred Muhumuza, who is an economist here in the country. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. Morning, our viewers.
Good morning. Now, we saw this happening last week. Actually, it was in the papers on Friday. And so questions have been coming in. Is the government not wary of just getting this money ever so often without having a clear plan on how to repay it?
I think you're really speaking to fundamental things. I think repayment is nothing that goes into the government's mind at the time of borrowing, because they're really looking at, this is what we need to do, where do we get the money from? So anybody offering money, they will grab it. The repayment part, I've not had much discussion. It's just an assumption that you see when we borrow, you do infrastructure, the economy will grow, and then the economy will pay. Now, there are so many blanks in that kind of chain of events, what we call the impact pathway, because you can't borrow, that is the reality. You may fail actually to execute the projects. Then you're beginning to miss out on the assumptions you made. You might execute the projects, and then the users, especially when what you're investing in is not the end.
Right.
Infrastructure is a means to the end. At the end of the day, there must be that factory, there must be that agricultural farm, there might be that business, which eventually uses the road, uses the electricity, uses whatever you're saying, and that is what will trigger into the continuous growth of the economy. The infrastructure just gives you that impact of growth while it is being constructed, and once it is there, it's part of your GDP. But the payment doesn't come out of that stock of your GDP, it comes on how are you using that stock. Now, in the case of Uganda, we don't see much of the anticipated assumptions that when we borrow this much and result of infrastructure constraints, the economy will grow and pay back. And now we are beginning to really face that burden of debt repayment. We may not be, because of the way numbers work, debt has the first call on resources. So you might say, we haven't defaulted. We have been servicing all our debts. But something is giving way. You're either falling short on drugs, payment of salaries for teachers, health workers, security forces. All those kinds of things are giving way because you have prioritized this one thing, which is cosmetic and very critical for you to continue in the debt market. You people must know you are paying your debts.
Right.
But somewhere your children are going hungry. Somewhere you're giving in the very vital things that matter to the economy if it is to grow, is investing in people, investing in those other factories and means to enable people keep running their businesses and moving the economy. That's what moves the economy, employing each other. So we may not be looking at that side of what are we borrowing for and how will it translate into growth.
Let me ask you a question. The president, during the Focus Summit, was actually interviewed by one of the Chinese, media houses. And what he said is that he's keen on getting more soft loans. Already we've been getting loans.
Yep.
Case in study number one for the Karuma and Simba Dam. The other one is the international airport that is still under construction. We also have the, the superhighway, the Entebbe superhighway, which is done, but still
There's no traffic.
Exactly.
Everybody is looking for the traffic. They are only robbers.
Yes.
Those ones have really invested in that infrastructure.
Exactly. And so we have one that is still in the pipeline, and this is the Uganda Gauge Railway. And all this money are soft loans. Now, let's get down to the rural electrification project, which the government signed, 800 billion Uganda shillings into. And let's read under the lines and help us do this math just to break it down for the viewers. Now, this loan comes at an interest of 2% spread over 20 years.
Yes.
And meaning it's not free. We have to pay it back. But now what they're saying is that we are going to get a grace period of 5 years, a management fee of 0.25%, and a commitment fee of 0.25%. This is just what was signed last week.
Yeah.
What does this mean?
To begin with, it doesn't qualify as a soft loan by the standards of where we have come from. If this was to be a loan from the World Bank for countries like where Uganda is today, the interest rate would have been 0.5%. Now you're already talking about 2%. The grace period would have been 10 years. You're talking of 5 years. The repayment period would have been 40 years. You're talking of 20. Now you're really making quite big assumptions that within 20 years this economy would have picked up to pay this loan and many others. So this is halfway between a commercial loan and what we used to call a concessional loan. Unfortunately, Uganda's burden, and even as people say debt to GDP, that's a stock. The terms of the loan are the most important. So when these things were set of debt to GDP for Uganda, you can go up to 50%. You're talking of the other concessional loans, which are repayable over 40 years, 0.5%. You have 10 years of grace. Surely at 50% you can manage that kind of debt, because as I've said earlier, it takes a smaller toll on you on an annual basis. It does not encroach on your budget,
Right.
so that you have to sacrifice basic things. And I've heard the president keep telling people, I'm still concentrating on these things, I will pay you your salaries later. Remember, we don't offer our services for the sake. We offer these services to get paid to deal with daily issues. I can't say my children stay home. When the president increases my salary, I'll take you to school. By then they will be old men and women. They will have lost education. So you cannot defer people's earnings, which they need to invest in individually, in order to actually give you the benefit of your infrastructure.
So is the problem to do with how we negotiate for this financial aid?
It's not even a negotiation issue. I think we have put ourselves too much into a rush for nothing. We have used the wrong terminology within government. As I've said, people just want to get in money here. And some of them, as somebody was saying, speaking from Kenya, is for the benefit of let's get the money and steal it. It has happened all over. It's happening all over Africa. Let's get in the money and steal it. I still see a narrative within, let's say, the road sector, where they are saying we have 20,000 kilometers of roads, national roads, under UNRA. Only about 5,000 of them are tarmac. So to them, every road must be tarmacked, which is not necessarily true for a poor country like us. You can have an all-weather road that is maram. Now, that will allow you to use part of the money to now develop the surrounding areas where this road is passing. Now, once those areas come up, your economy grow. Now, using your own resources out of that economic growth, you'll be able to tarmac this road. So you don't have to use the narrative to say, I have a deficit of 75% of my roads not tarmacked.
Right.
A maram road is a good road, allows you to get to the speed limits of 100 kilometers an hour, or 80 in most of these places, or 50. So why do you want to tarmac every road? Why do you want to take electricity to every village? Some of these villages are just about lighting, charging a phone, watching a 14-inch screen TV, which can be done on a solar panel.
Yes.
Rural electrification is about processing agro products and other things. Now, that does not mean you take power to every village. You can find vantage points, put power there, then the raw materials will be collected and brought to that particular facility. That's how the world develops.
Yes.
Centralize a point, let the raw material come in there. Because in any case, even if you put the power anywhere, most of these factories are scavenging for raw materials. And I put up an agricultural facility. I want to mill 20 tons of maize per day.
Right.
You don't expect me to find that within a village. I'm going to literally be hunting in 2-3 districts. So you don't have to put power in all the 3 districts.
But the justification that the government actually gave for this particular loan is that by next year, actually after these 2 hydropower projects are done, the Simba and the Karuma one, we'll be having excess electricity. And this electricity has to be put into use. And so they're saying they're going to make sure that 287 sub-counties now access in the rural areas.
That is the wrong language we are talking about here. Because a previous mistake cannot be corrected by a second mistake. You made a mistake to over-increase the power supply. And if you read our power sector program 10-15 years ago, we were benchmarking ourselves on Europe. Kilowatt hour per person. And we said we have a big shortfall compared to European countries. Spain, Greece, Sweden. These countries, for heaven's sake, have winter where they have to use a lot of power to power up their systems. We have a summer here throughout the year. They have, when it is summer, they all have to put ACs to cool down. So they are literally using power throughout the year. Wrong benchmarking. But using those wrong benchmarks, we borrowed excessively, we planned excessively. I've looked at all the projections we had at the time of demand for power then. None of them has come to anywhere to reality. But they were driven by the need, we must make a case, borrow the money, and do this infrastructure. Now you have excess power. You are assuming by putting it on Mhumza's house, I am going to use it. For heaven's sake, the tariff is 800 shillings.
Right.
And that car unit doesn't last a minute. So most of the poor people are going to continue watching those power lines, and we have this evidence already sitting with us. Where you have already connected, rural electrification is not starting today. It has been here with us for some time. And we have really seen villages with, let's say, 500 households, and only 10 are connected. Even the 10 who are connected are using very little power. So the repayment of these loans that have gone into the energy sector is you don't have to drive household consumption. Actually, you would rather put most of these rural households on solar panels. It's good environmental protection. It saves you your cost.
Right.
But it's also affordable to them. And this can be financed through private sector, because already private sector and energy schemes are already going on.
So what you're saying is that the government needs to relook that again.
They should be relooking that idea of thinking, once you take power to the people, they will use it. Because you are in for another surprise.
The other question has been, if we're having excess electricity, why is electricity that expensive?
Now, that is the other part of the mistakes we made. Because you as government will say, here is a site for power construction. And you're making all those weird assumptions we have talked about, that once the power is there, energy costs will go down, and then factories will come up and I will pay you.
Right.
The person lending you the money is doing the business case, the private sector way. He's trying to look at where is Uganda's energy consumption going to come from. So that we are surprised by excess energy is not for the private sector who invested. It is for us within government who did not think.
Right.
Or who thought but had other ideas. The private sector clearly saw these guys are not going to consume the power, so they put their repayments in contracts. So the more the power you get, the more expensive it is going to get, because it's no longer economics of an increased supply will reduce the price. It is within contract agreements. Bujagali would be saying, I'm selling to you 250 megawatts per month or per year or per day, whatever it is. That's what much you pay me. So whether you have used the 80, 70, don't tell me. Now, me and you who use the 80 out of the 250 have got to find money to pay for the entire 250, because now driven by a legal agreement. And sadly, when me and you fail, because now there is a limit to how far the tariff can go. And now that you can't increase the tariff further, you've got to find a subsidy from the government budget using other resources. And these are the things I was saying now. You are going to either cut an investment in drugs, in scholastic materials, in policing, in security.
But is it that the government doesn't know all this? Before they get into these agreements, getting these loans, don't they ask for advice and guidance from experts?
It's a crazy thing for people to try and think government is a homogeneous entity like Malak is here. Government is is not one entity. And it is so hard to know where instructions and the people who work in government, who make government, it can really be very ridiculous within government policy making processes. Especially when you have systems broken down or muted. It's like you mute this mic, we shall continue talking, but our listeners out there will not be getting the message.
Right.
So you have a system that makes policies where somebody will come and say the president has directed. Now where is government? Is government the president? The president heads a government. So the president, by the time he directs, he should have come through a process of rational thinking, briefs, analysis, all sorts of things. Then you can say, here is where we go. Just take an example of, again, talking about concessional loans, or the loans the president is talking about. Security cameras. We just borrowed from commercial loans. $104 million. going by the market rate today, about 7-8%. That can't be a commercial loan. And for 3 years. Now we want to borrow for the airline. Somebody is directing now. Do you want to say there is government working rationally or government working irrationally? And I can imagine a lot of people lending to government are not even looking at these investments, because when I go to a bank to borrow and say, I want to borrow and build a house, I want to borrow and put up a farm. The proposal is supposed to be about the farm, and the bank should look at that farm and see whether the farm can pay back, and then put some collateral as secondary options.
That brings me to the other question. If China keeps on giving us this money, and they clearly know that already we have a debt that we're yet to repay, they clearly know that our economy is struggling, they clearly know that we're relatively a poor country, then why are they giving off this money every single time and again? Is it that they have a hidden agenda? Is this new colonialism that we're seeing brewing?
There's been that talk, of course. China's hidden agenda. Neo-colonialism, which is basically market-based. I usually don't want to blame the lender, much as the law in some jurisdictions in countries allows the lender to be blamed. To say, before you lend to this person, did you really assess their ability to pay? I was part of the team with my colleagues at the Ministry of Finance who really went into the trenches to negotiate the financing of the second Nile Bridge, the source of the Nile Bridge. We really took through periods and periods of discussions with the Japanese about debt sustainability for Uganda. What is your debt sustainability? Our Director Economic Affairs, Lawrence Kiza, retired now, had to spend many flights to Japan to go and explain what is our debt sustainability. Because they were mindful about the borrower. Those are Japanese. Now the Chinese will say, you want it? Here it is for you.
Take it.
So it is up to you to determine what you want and how you want it and when. They will not give you that caution, because partly the reason we want to China is that is our modality. That's how their country works. We are saying the IMF, World Bank, African World Bank, they delay us. But these are the questions they were asking. How do you intend to repay? So we decided to close that window or reduce that window and open a new window. These guys are not asking us questions. They come with a ready-made project. Sometimes we're saying design and build, we will pay.
Yes.
Now you've lost everything. You go and find money, design, build, contractor facilitated financing. I am going to borrow at 7% and then bring the debt to you. Doesn't mean if I do it for you, I've actually paid for you. You still have to pay. So the whole ultimate burden comes back to us. Why are we rushing out there so urgently? But I'm glad to possibly begin to see, when I read between the lines, China is beginning to say, well, I could have taken over Uganda's assets, but they have legal and social moral obligations to their peers in the world.
Do you feel so? Because case in study, we have the Zambian government that is now giving off its assets and its resources. Now, the Kenneth Kaunda International Airport in Zambia has been taken over. And
her Batota boat in Sri Lanka was the first, I think, of the main things.
Yeah.
There are also discussions on Djibouti. Discussions in Ethiopia.
Now you can imagine the Entebbe airport being renamed under a Chinese name just because we have not paid this debt. And still in Zambia, we have we hear that the Chinese own 60% shares of the Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation.
Sure.
Because they were not able to repay.
They also own so much in America, but here, because they have leverages, they have gone through the stock exchange and bought and have invested so much into America.
Right.
Here, because we don't have a developed stock exchange, if these were listed companies, they would come and take them. The Nigerians, I'm told, have just taken UTL. So you have a lot of these government things go. If you are a reckless borrower, the law just determines this. You don't blame the Chinese. The lender will take over your assets. It happens every other day. You have the quarrel between Crane Bank and DFCU and all the other things. Crane Bank itself was taking over assets of those who had failed to pay. So if you fail to pay, you don't blame the lender when they come to actually execute and say, all I'm trying to do, you are lying like in receivership. I'm not taking over your asset, but I am going to manage it for the period as I pay myself. After that period, I give it back to you. And for some of these countries, it's going to take 50 years, 100 years.
Forever.
Which is like forever. For given a lifetime of a human being, which is like 50, 60 years in Uganda,
yes.
It looks really forever. But as I've said, China is not going to drive this agenda. I don't see them drive it continuously and everywhere and forever. They have moral obligations towards their peers and G7 or G20 or whatever it is. So they are going to reach a level and say, wait a minute, maybe we should scale back our lending to these countries so that we are not forced to take over entire countries. Because if China's debt to us is over 4 billion, this economy is 27 billion, 26, and we're still borrowing from them, soon they will have to take over every valuable asset. And we know 60% of the economy in Uganda is about Wakiso and Kampala, Mukono, and Tebe. And they can't take the private property.
The U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Rex Tillerson, actually said, and I will quote him, he said, Africa should be careful not to forfeit its sovereignty when accepting these loans from China.
Yes. I hope Africa is listening.
Could this be the hidden agenda that China now wants to take over Africa? African being the richest continent in the whole world in terms of natural resources.
And Tillerson is not speaking this just for Africans. He's worried of the global changing dynamics. Because Africa, as we've said, is the source of raw material where you take and do your factories and manufacturing, those sorts of things. So if China comes through this route and takes over Africa without using guns, but using banks. They learned this from Professor Mamdani, who said the Germans thought they would rule the world through tanks, military tanks. Now they have realized the banks do it. And Germany is the strongest economy in Europe, bankrolling the others, holding them together. But thank God for them, it is within the context and framework of the European Union. So they actually are mindful about their brothers and sisters in these neighboring countries.
Right.
Now here we are. We don't have a big brother. We are going to be taken over and our resources captured because of our failure to be careful, as Tillerson is warning us. But his warning is coming from, hey, here is somebody who is smarter. I've been using drones in Africa. I've been using battleships. Now China has literally taken a very smart route of lending and sign on the agreement and take it over. Not even a single bullet fired. They would be worried of that. But I don't see the Chinese eventually also wanting to be that ruthless to the Africans.
You think so?
But they don't have to be ruthless to themselves either. They have really put a lot of money into Africa. And they have every reason to find a strategy of how do we get paid back. Now, 10 years ago, people would have thought they are looking at our natural resources. Those dynamics have changed. Since the slowdown in the global economy, Chinese factories are not going to be so hungry for raw materials. So Africa is no longer the darling as far as I have gold, I have diamond, I have copper, I have cement, I have all sorts of, I have oil. Those are no longer the immediate needs of China today because they already have factories and raw materials piled up there because the global economy has reduced. So there are different agenda in Africa. Even if it was me, I would now switch from grabbing out raw materials, produce for who? Rather looking for the markets in Africa. And we're seeing that switch that now there is a new dimension of China ramping up trade in Africa to sell their goods.
Speaking of trade and speaking of, Africa getting markets in China, still in the same interview that the president was being interviewed during the FOMAC summit in one of the Chinese, media houses, he said that he's keen on trying to negotiate with the China government for it to open markets for the Ugandan exporter to find markets there and sell their goods and products. But this relationship seems to be taking too long to be implemented because now it looks like it's one-sided.
Yes.
The Chinese products have flooded the African market.
And they're going to continue doing so.
And they're going to continue doing so. Just go to downtown. You will see that 90% of the products there are just Chinese products.
They are uprooting even Europeans and other African investors.
Exactly. So what will it take for us to get an equal share in their markets in China?
That is going to take forever, if ever. Because unfortunately, trade is not about what presidents talk. The World Development Report by the UN 2005 says, who are the gatekeepers of trade items? It is supermarkets. It's those private to private businesses. You just don't walk with your melons into Europe because you signed an agreement with Prime Minister May. It's going to be Tesco, Sainsbury, which will say, bring in so much melon and we'll put it on our shelves. Now, that supermarket also is responding to the needs and concerns of the customers. They have dictated, we don't want melon of this character, we don't want fish of this character, we don't want this. Now, the president needs to come back here and we develop our research and development so that we can structure our products to match what are the Chinese interests. This is what we're saying now, global dynamics, analyzing data on WhatsApp, data on Facebook, data on, what are the people, because people in these things, they are expressing what they want most, and the markets are responding. The touch screen wasn't there.
Right.
BlackBerry is out of the market because they thought the touch screen would be for young people. But they forgot young people are actually the ones who are going to be using IT. Old people are very few and rarely use the IT things. So they got wiped out. So if you don't hear what do the people want, and then go into research and development to develop these things that the people want, you are going to be in for serious, serious trouble. So even our agriculture, we are saying we're ramping up agriculture, want to produce 20 million tons, I think, of coffee per year. What type of coffee? What should be in that coffee? What do the Chinese want? Who knows what the Chinese want in his cup of coffee? It's not just coffee to make it black. There are certain things that you need in there. So you want to get your $10 million today and give it to Kituza Naro and say, you go and study Chinese behaviors and interests. What is in Chinese herbal tea? Can we incorporate that ingredient into our coffee? What is in Chinese green tea? Can we incorporate that in our coffee?
So we need to stop moving blindly.
Don't just move and have those discussions. The president's discussion is like bombing from the air.
Okay.
The soldiers, foot soldiers, must eventually walk in, study the situation, and make the right response. And I think that's why I say there's no government if all you are saying the president said. Please work with the president, who is the leader of government, and there is the prime minister, leader of government business, and let's respond to these emerging opportunities. Otherwise, we're writing on water.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Keep your views coming. The hashtag is Morning at NTV. That's on Twitter. You can also stream us live and drop in your comments, NTV Uganda, on Facebook and YouTube pages. That's it for Kickstarter segment. Your views, keep them coming. Of course, the government is looking at this. And so what do you think about this particular relationship that we have with China? What should the government be wary of? So that has been it for Kickstarter segment. Morning at NTV still continues. Up next is Reality on the Ground with Andrew Chamagero. Keep it here.